Hey, what's going on everybody? Cryo here, and unless you're living under a rock, you know that Shadowlands pre-patch releases October 13th. If you've been away for a while, or have just taken a break recently, you may come back to find the game a tad different. A lot of spells have returned, been reworked or removed altogether, talents have changed, playstyles may have switched up, and with the removal of corruption, you may be left thinking, what now? Today I wanted to specifically talk about the tanks. This is sort of a in case you missed it type video that aims to help point out the key factors when trying to figure out how to tank during the pre-patch. Let's get it. In general, the removal of corruption will be felt by all tanks. Whether you're a versatile stacking brick wall or a Twilight Devastation fiend, you will notice a difference. The removal of Twilight Devastation means your tank does a significantly less amount of damage. More importantly, this means that maintaining threat may become an issue. Without Twilight Devastation procs to help maintain that aggro, you're left to your own devices and some classes will struggle. If you were a versatility stacker, you will feel more vulnerable in some scenarios that you didn't before. Just be ready for the transition. My second general point about corruption removal pertains to gear. Think back to all of the pieces of loot that you received that would have been an upgrade if it were not for corruption. If you held on to them, awesome. Be sure to give your bank a quick scan as you may have better pieces to equip. If you're like me and throw everything away, now is a great time to use the item restore feature. This one hurts. The removal of Lash of the Void and Twilight Devastation is indeed devastating to our damage output and threat generation. They will be missed. Talents have been reworked and we no longer have to talent into both Flame Crash and Abyssal Strike because they have been merged. Spell Devastation has been removed as a talent and is now granted as a baseline ability. Gluttony is no more and has been replaced by Demonic, meaning if you were used to the passive, high survivability, low damage talent build, it's time to learn a new trick. The build to use in pre-patch is not likely to vary. Come Shadowlands, we may see some variety due to interaction with legendaries, but until then we are kind of stuck. The rotation is ultimately the same with one addition, Fell Devastation. This is a high priority ability, falling just behind Spirit Bomb, especially if targets are lacking the frailty debuff. Speaking of the rotation, this is a good time to mention the importance of Fell Devastation and Spirit Bomb. As said before, threat is going to be a major issue for Vengeance starting in the pre-patch. With an AoE cap of 5 being placed on Soul Cleave, Spirit Bomb becomes vital in generating AoE threat when more than 5 targets are present. Although Spirit Bomb does rely on souls, and if you are running dry on souls and more adds join the fray, picking them up will be a massive pain. Sigil of Chains and Fell Devastation can help, but what is going to be even more beneficial is group coordination. Let people know ahead of time that your AoE threat is not super strong, and tab target frequently. Stat priorities fortunately remain the same. Of course, item level and sockets, and after that aim for versatility and haste. Azerite traits do not change. Keep in mind Heart of Darkness is extremely strong, and if you can scoop up 3 pieces with it, do so. Azerite essences see some changes, although most players were already doing so, and Mythic Plus Vision of Perfection Major will provide higher metamorphosis uptime. Unfortunately, this interaction will be eliminated once Shadowlands goes live, so enjoy it while you can. Vengeance Demon Hunters, in comparison to the other tanks, rank rather low in regard to the higher end of endgame content, but that doesn't mean you should stop playing them. Let's talk talents. One major change to Guardian Druid comes with their affinity selections. Specific spells such as Typhoon and Ursul's Vortex are now locked behind Balance and Restoration affinities, respectively. That's right, no more Druid, Mask Grip, Vortex, Typhoon combos. More playstyle changes include the addition of the Heart of the Wild talent. This talent empowers your selected affinity, granting you a tad bit more utility. While off-tanking in raids, this allows you to throw out some extra heals or additional damage. The final talent change to note is the removal of Lunar Beam and its replacement Tooth and Claw. This talent seems very decent on single target fights. Most likely it will not see too much play outside of raiding. With that being said, the talent builds have not changed too drastically. In any scenario, you may opt into renewal for extra healing if the mobility is not required. In Mythic Plus, you may opt out of Heart of the Wild if your group prefers the extra crowd control. Swapping out a bear form is not advised while tanking in Mythic Plus, so Heart of the Wild may not be used to its full potential. Incarnation did receive a huge buff since it grants us the benefits of Berserk now, meaning it reduces the cooldown and rage cost of Frenzied Regeneration and Iron Fur respectively. Defensively, this places it above Galactic Guardian. The rotation for Guardian Druid remains very much the same. This isn't a class guide video, so I will not go into too much detail. Just remember to not cap your rage by spending it on Iron Fur defensively or Maul offensively. Speaking of Maul, if you have taken the Tooth and Claw talent, be sure to track your stacks as your Maul will be empowered greatly. The stat priority has also remained unchanged. Guardian Druids actually benefit from the diminishing returns on secondaries, and because of this, versatility is still king. When it comes to Azerite traits, Guardian Druids again luck out. Ideally for tiers 1 and 2, you want to aim for 3 Heart of Darkness and 3 Twisted Claws. If you still do not have access to the raid, aim for Burst of Savagery or Layer Domain. For the 3rd tier, generic stat or offensive traits are good, and for the 4th tier, Impassive Visage is always strong. Azerite Essences, you guessed it, no changes. Of course, you can swap any of these if you have a stronger personal preference. Remember that the buffed Incarnation is very strong, so Vision of Perfection will help smooth out some areas where Incarnation is on cooldown. Even if you took a break at the end of BFA, Guardian Druid will feel mechanically the same, which is a good thing when we're talking about level squishes and class overhauls. Guardian Druids are defensively solid choices, but still lack in the offensive department. Where to start with this class? There have been several changes and a bit of variety has opened up. You will have to make a choice. Do you want to be more offensive or defensive? Even when you choose the latter, you will have to become accustomed to your defensive abilities not being readily available as often as they once were. Talents have been reworked, moving some around, removing a few, and adding more, furthering the variability of some builds. Players used to the Anger Management Thunderclap playstyle can still do so. It won't be so appealing as before, but it's still a solid choice that can handle any content confidently. If you want an alternative and different flavor of Protection Warrior, this build may provide a higher DPS output over a shorter time. Remembering that players have lost their Twilight Devastation and threat matters, snap aggro abilities and burst DPS cooldowns are always welcome. More importantly, this build will see much more playtime when Shadowlands officially releases due to its synergy with legendaries, soulbinds, and covenants. It may be beneficial to start building some muscle memory and learning the extra key bindings sooner rather than later. The stat priority for Protection Warrior ultimately stays the same. Haste and versatility are great, item levels and sockets are always a nice boost. Azerite traits remain untouched. Ideally you want to aim for 3 times Bastion of Might, 2 times Heart of Darkness, and 1 time Deafening Crash. If you lack access to the raid, Brace for Impact is not a bad choice when using the Devastator talent. Essences also remain the same. As always, swap out your preferences where applicable. Warriors have the potential to play similar to how they felt in BFA, but you will notice the decline in their AoE damage output. Probably the best class to not feel the negative effects of the loss of corruption. Of course, we will see lower damage numbers with the loss of Twilight Devastation and versatility stacking, but our survivability and threat generation are less impacted in comparison to the other tanks. Players will have to learn a few new tricks and abilities, but other than the removal of Ironskin Brew and the addition of Celestial Brew, Brewmasters ultimately play the same. In terms of talents, Brewmasters are sort of stuck with a cookie cutter build that can be used in all content. You can opt into Chi Burst for some AoE threat and damage, and alternate between Black Ox Statue and Ring of Peace depending on your needs. The rotation for Brewmaster remains the same. The major change is in not sitting on Purifying Brews and Celestial Brews for too long. Do your best to use them to their fullest potential. Keg Smash, Blackout Kick, and Breath of Fire on a cooldown while trying to maintain 100% uptime on Rushing Jade Wind. Keep in mind we do have 2 offensive cooldowns to use now, Touch of Death and Invoke Nizao the Black Ox. Use both of them as much as possible to maximize your damage output. There are some defensive components to these abilities, and if you would like further information on them, I recommend checking out Wowhead where you can find extensive written guides. The stat priority is largely unchanged. Item level and sockets are on top, followed by versatility. Crit for more damage, mastery for more defense. Azerite traits have changed a little going into pre-patch. If you are rocking the 3 times Training of Nizao, 2 time Heart of Darkness, and 1 time Boiling Brew, you can continue to do so. You may also opt into 3 Heart of Darknesses and skip the Boiling Brew altogether. As it stands, straight No Chaser will still exist, however due to the removal of Ironskin Brew, it's utterly worthless. Essences have not changed, Crucible of Flame will still be your go-to major for damage output in most scenarios. Brewmasters are more self-sufficient than they have been for a while, and defensively still remain a solid top choice. With realistic pulls in Mythic Plus, you should not see too drastic of a difference in your ability to maintain threat. However, your damage output will be lower than you are probably used to seeing. Fun fact, things only get better for monks in Shadowlands with Legendary Synergy and Covenants, so it's a perfect time to start learning how to play this class if you do not already. Another class that does not fall completely apart without corruption to aid it is the Blood Death Knight. Of course, without Twilight Devastation our damage is lower, however we did not rely too heavily on it in regard to threat generation and maintaining aggro. If you were a versatility junkie, you may want to brush up on how much certain mechanics feel without the extra cushion. Some minor gameplay changes can include the introduction of some new rune forges. Without going into too much detail, Rune of Hysteria will likely be your default. If you are feeling spicy and have multiple weapons, you can reforge a second with Rune of Sanguination, since you can swap weapons in combat, more importantly in Mythic Plus. During boss execute phases, having Sanguination can help your output that much more. Rune Tap is now a baseline ability. This is awesome. Get used to using it right before engaging a pack to smooth out your initial damage intake while building up your bone shields. Talents have changed up a little bit, however there is no glaring impact. At first glance you'll notice that Ossuary is no longer a talent, but baseline. Unfortunately, you will not have access to this during pre-patch since it is a level 58 ability. Fret not, you will be fine. The talent build for rating and Mythic Pluses have not altered too greatly. In most cases, you will choose Relish in Blood over Blood Tap, however I recommend playing around with both. I personally enjoy having Blood Tap at my disposal, and sometimes the healing from Relish in Blood feels underwhelming. You will also make a decision if you want to use Red Thirst or Bone Storm, largely depending on your level of comfortability with the content you are doing. It's also worth mentioning Bloodworms and Voracious. Bloodworms will offer a tiny boost to DPS, and Voracious will boost your HPS. Player discretion here, choose whichever you are more comfortable with. The rotational priority remains unchanged, minus hitting Rune Tap before getting meleeed on the initial pull. The stat priority as well remains unchanged, aim for that versatility and haste. Azerite traits have always been a weak spot for Blood Death Knights. The generic class traits are not particularly good, and for that we tend to look at tiers 2, 3, and 4 first when deciding which piece to wear. As always, Heart of Darkness deserves its mention, and if you can snag 3 of these, do so. Azerite Essences, you guessed it, no changes. Crucible of Flame remains a solid DPS choice for rating and Mythic Plus. The loss of corruption is the same as the other tanks. Like the Blood Decay, Protection Paladins did not really suffer in terms of generating threat, so although we lose random spikes of damage, we are still in a pretty solid state. Holy Power is back, and that is the main change players will notice on October 13th. We are now part of the Build a Resource, Spend a Resource party. Luckily, generating Holy Power is quite easy for a Protection Paladin, especially when paired with certain talents. The final gameplay change that players will need to get used to is the use of Word of Glory. It replaces Light of the Protector and is your self-heal. Talking about talents, Protection Paladins are seeing a few of them return. With these new talents, some interesting playstyles will become viable, and we all love variety. Some of you may be worried about active mitigation uptime without Blessed Hammer, but learning how to pull your Holy Power at the end of a pull is part of being a decent Protection Paladin. Of course, if you are more comfortable with Blessed Hammer, by all means, just know that giving up Holy Shield is kind of a lot. Hammer of Righteousness does still cleave while standing in your consecration if that was your main concern. Lastly, in regard to talents, Divine Purpose and Sanctified Wrath give the best balance of increased damage and defensiveness when compared to the other talents on their row. However, Righteous Protector becomes the go-to talent if you are playing the Light's Decree build, more on that in a bit. The rotational priority system is largely unchanged. Just remember to never cap on Holy Power, spending it on Shield of the Righteous or Word of Glory if you are below 50% health and have a Shining Light proc. Stat priorities for survivability is unchanged, favoring haste for faster holy power generation, leading to more Shield of the Righteous casts. Now for the fun part, let's talk about some different Azerite Essence oriented builds. First up, my personal favorite is the Light's Decree build. Use this for a balanced offensive and defensive build, abusing holy power. For this build, you will want to swap Sanctified Wrath to Righteous Protector for more Avenging Wrath uptime. Your major will be Vision of Perfection, while using the Lucid, Strife, and Null Barrier minors. You want to pair this build with 3 times Light's Decree, 1 time Inspiring Vanguard, and then Avenger's Might or generic traits. The second build has remnants of the BFA playstyle and can be taken when you do not have 3 times Light's Decree. Your major will be Concentrated Flame, your minor will be Strife, Null Barrier, and Symbiotic Presence. As usual, you will always want to try to get at least 1 Light's Decree, 1 to 3 Inspiring Vanguards, and then neutral traits such as Clockwork Heart or Heart of Darkness. The third and final build revolves around a more defensive setup, excellent for players who may be new to the class. Use this if you want to focus on being more defensive or are just learning. Your major will be Touch of the Everlasting, your minors will be Strife, Null Barrier, and Strive for Perfection. Of course, if you can, you want at least 1 times Light's Decree, 1 to 3 Inspiring Vanguards, and then neutral traits. If you are trying to run some Mythic Plus, you may want to swap out essences for Stand Your Ground minor and Sphere of Suppression minor. It is not a terrible time to be a Protection Paladin. Offensively and defensively, you will feel pretty balanced and ready to tackle any form of content. That's it for this one, folks. I appreciate you stopping by. I hope you learned something, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Stay frosty.